In this video, we're going to give you the real reason why the oceans will rise. We are not going to discredit from, what the world's saying about greenhouse gases and things like that, but we are going to tell you some things that maybe you don't know and probably what they don't want you to know. So, climate change basically, we all know this, or global warming it used to be, is going to be, they're going to natural effects, human activities, and it's going to rise the sea levels, right? That's their whole thing. And the sea levels are going to rise, but not not because of what they're telling us. And they're basically saying there's going to be some melting ice. We're burning fossil fuels and we're producing CO2, right? And so, and then they show you these pictures like, oh no, we're going to lose Florida. We're going to lose the West Coast. We're going to lose the East Coast. Okay. Now, if you go to the end of this PowerPoint, go through this, I think I'm going to blow your mind. And at the end, you're going to be so much more knowledgeable of what's really going on. They really don't want you to know everything. And this PowerPoint's going to tell you. So, they tell us the EPA is going to tell us one thing, right? They get this nice graph. And basically, these are the things that they're saying is causing climate change: fossil fuel, electricity, agriculture, transportation. Okay, this is what the government wants you to know. All right, and there's a lot of truth to this. All right. Now, these are the deniers. Half the people are like, "Hey, the world climate change," and the other one like, it's not happening. And so they want you to be in a two-choice world. Either you're Republican or you're Democrat. Either it's hell or heaven, God or not God. Us or them. You're with us or you're with the enemy. They want you to have a two-choice world because that's how they keep you preoccupied. Well, climate change is the same thing. So here's the deniers. Weather has not changed. It's, temperatures very naturally, you know, alternative scientific theories. God is in control. So you get it, right? So half the people don't believe it. They got good arguments, and the people who do believe it have great arguments as well. This is what the mainstream wants to tell you. Now that's a whole nother ballgame. What do you see in the news? You got a girl coming over the ocean in a sailboat, right? And like, oh, the poor girl, and and then she takes airplanes probably to all her other interviews, okay? And then goes back on a sailboat. And what was that sailboat burning diesel fuel in the middle of the ocean? I don't know, and we don't care. It doesn't make a difference. But the mainstream wants you to believe that that climate change is mostly being done by humans, and it is, but not necessarily by you and me. Yes, by humans, but not you and me. We are doing some, and as you see this PowerPoint go through, I'm going to blow your mind. Okay, and of course, and then they say 7% don't believe it. So what they want to try to do is make the non-believers look like they're an anomaly, that they're a minority. They're conspiracy people. This is the mainstream. We know how the mainstream works. So let's talk about um, rain droplets. I need to tell you how rain is formed. It's not just like water evaporates into the sky and falls down as rain. No way. If there was nothing in the sky, then it would be like 300% humidity for it to rain. You need to have particles. And if you look at this little picture here, the little 2 millimeter circle, that's a dust particle. And this is what this whole video is going to be about the dust, okay, about the particles, and what's really going to cause our oceans to rise. And I even calculate throughout this how much water is going to rise. So the dust particle starts up, it gets airborne, aerosolized, and then it attracts the water, the H2O. And as the particle gets bigger and bigger, okay, and that's why you'll see like contrails, from airplanes. Well, that's because it's getting bigger and bigger. The particles are getting larger. Then finally, they get so big they fall out of the sky and it rains or snows. All right. Now, what causes particles? Well, let's talk about the natural ones that have been doing it for like millions of years. rain clouds are made by trees create rain clouds as well, because trees will seed the clouds with particles. For example, seeds and different types of aerosols. As these aerosols go in the sky, they coagulate, they hit each other, and they get bigger and bigger from the water that evaporates. So yes, trees do produce particles that do produce rain. Okay, now we have a problem. We're destroying our forests, and we've had more fires every year, and we're going to get into those fires in a minute. What else produces rain? Phytoplankton. Okay, think about this. You got oceans, right? Most of the world's ocean, and it grows depending on the temperature. So phytoplankton basically either, if the oceans are warm or cool, will depend on how much phytoplankton is made. Well, the phytoplankton also produces particles in the sky. So when it's warming, there's more phytoplankton. More particles go to the sky. And what do particles in the sky do? They create rain clouds, right? Raindrops. When it's cold, and let's say the temperature of the oceans are getting cooler, well, guess what? Less phytoplankton, less particles. This is the natural way. Well, things aren't natural anymore. Excuse my voice today. Bacteria. Bacteria also is natural. Bacteria gets up in the sky, it forms drops. So but now they're making genetically modified bacteria, and they're messing with it, and it's causing ice, on plants, and they're making plants resistant. So the bacteria, and you can look all this stuff up if you like. It's all on the internet. I'm not making this up. These are all facts. So the bacteria used to be natural. Now it's not natural anymore. And the genetically modified bacteria is not causing rain. So now we're going to get into one of the biggest problems. You've all seen the turtle with the straw inside him, and the next day they had all new straws, right, in the whole world. But people use bags and garbage bags. I mean, we have our grocery stores have bags, and so this stuff is ending up in the ocean. Well, what does this really do? Of course, it causes problems, but it also causes reflection issues, and it doesn't permit the oceans to evaporate. So you have these things floating around the ocean, okay? And there's more of these. And some of these are large. I mean, very large, where they're actually changing shipping routes because of them. And so they are not permitting the natural evaporation of the ocean, and not to mention the pollution and the damage to our ecosystem. Okay, so here is a chart of things that go into our atmosphere. And, volcanoes, right? Wildfires, agriculture. I'm going to talk about diesel fuel in a minute. We're going to talk about ships in a minute. And so there's a lot of pollutants, and a lot of them are particles in our atmosphere. And basically, we need particles. The natural particles are the ones we want, to create the rain, because we want natural rain. But nothing's natural today. So if you notice, one thing that's not on this list is CO2. Now, CO2 is a problem. And I'll show you a graph what CO2 does. See, they're assuming that all the sun comes to the earth, heats it up, and then the CO2 that we create keeps the warm air in the earth that we heated up, and that is what causes that heat, causes the snow to melt. We're going to get into that here in a minute. And here's a picture I just talked about. If you see the sun, they're assuming that all that ray and sun ray is going into the atmosphere, into the earth. Some gets deflected, which this is going to be the big problem they're not telling you about. And then, of course, the stuff that's in earth, it heats up the earth, right? As it heats up the earth, then at night, then all of a sudden it wants to radiate back out. And if you've got CO2, it kind of holds it back. And the North Pole and the South Pole are melting, right? So this is what they want. But let's talk about this. So your atmosphere is slowly getting filled up by particles, okay? Some particles fall to the ground and create rain, okay? Some particles float up to the upper atmosphere, and they can stay up there for years and years, and even decades. Some of those volcanoes we had, the dust is still up there, reflecting the sun, and it dims the sun. The word dimming, very important word. And so, we've got airplanes, volcanoes, and so what happens is once the particles get up into the upper troposphere and the ozone layer and above that, they can float up there for a long time. And now we're going to start to cause problems to our oceans because we are creating so many particles and putting so many particles in the sky. And I'm going to show you this momentarily in this reflecting. And, fires, and aerosol cans, and cars, all of that is escaping and going up into the atmosphere. All right, let's start off with number one, airplanes. All right, now airplanes, we have approximately 100,000 sorties per day. That's a lot of planes. And this is just the planes flying over at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the first day of this year, which is 2020. These are all the planes just here. Well, there's 100,000 flights. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, jet fuel. Basically, how do you make jet fuel? Well, you know what? If you ask a pilot, hey, what are those contrails or chemtrails? He'll say, oh, that's just normal kerosene. They have no clue what they're talking about. Kerosene is a very major polluting type of fuel. Okay, and there's different jet fuels. Now I'm going to show you these jet fuels. Okay, here we go. If you look at these jet fuels, this is what's in them. So people think that when you fly an airplane, and airplane just one of the things we're going to cover, that you have pure combustion. And pure combustion would mean you have vapor and you have carbon dioxide. Well, they never tell you about all the carbon dioxide that's made by the airplanes, the 100,000 sorties. Think about how much carbon dioxide, CO2, from the planes alone. It blows away everything else, okay, in a day. They're not telling you about that. And they're not telling you about what's in the fuel. Now look at this, JP8. That fuel is now being used by most of the countries in the world. And look what they did. The aluminum content of it skyrocketed. Look at that, aluminum and jet fuel A, and then it went to JP8. Parts per billion. Look at that. Look at the strontium. Skyrocketed. The titanium skyrocketed. The lead actually went down. The magnesium skyrocketed. That is what's in the fuel that they're burning over your head. Now, it's no wonder that on certain days you'll see trails just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, those are particles that are collecting water, and they're getting bigger and bigger. Okay, because you need particles to create clouds, and a lot of these clouds have a lot of particles. Okay, and this is just an example of how many flights you'd have. The issue here is that every year for the last 20 years we've increased our flights 4 to 5%. Why? Well, because our kids went to colleges that are nowhere near us, and now we got to go fly to their new homes. Yeah, that's probably one. Their families are getting split up because of weather and floods, and we got to go fly there. Okay, so what do we got to do? It's not rocket science. What do we got to do? We got to quit flying, right? Maybe we still fly, but we don't fly as much. We don't unnecessarily fly. We plan it out. Flying is destroying our planet because of the CO2, which we'll talk about, and the jet fuel that's being used. And and if you look at sometimes in the day, nobody looks up because we're too busy running around. Nobody looks up anymore. But if you look up, you're going to see that you have a perfect day. And after a few hours, it looks like this. And then a couple hours later, it's all white. And then that moves to another city, and they think it's a storm coming in. And yes, this stuff rains. It does cause rain. If you look up at the patents, okay, we've the fuel and there's also spray nozzles on planes. So there's some planes they use for atmospheric conditioning, and they have to think about this. They have to control some of the weather, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's 500 nuclear power plants in this planet. Okay, well, 100 of them are in the U.S. And here's your real problem: those 100 still have their radioactive spent fuel rods on site in buildings built like small Kmart's. So what do you need? You need a tornado, a flood, a hurricane. So they will steer any rainstorm or any lightning storm, and they use planes like this. You can look up these patents. There's literally thousands of patents. Okay. All right. Let's move on. We got space dust. Okay. I know that sounds crazy, but dust falls into our atmosphere every day. Okay. And and this is how much falls into our atmosphere: between 60 and 100 tons of space dust. And it comes from who knows where. Some of it's radioactive, whatever. A lot of it stays in the atmosphere. And guess what the space dust turns into? Yeah, it reflects the sun. When it gets lower, it probably turns into rain. And if it's real heavy, it falls to the ground. And if you notice, our space dust, not just space dust, but this is contamination around the Earth, and a lot of this is man-made from we're sending up all our satellites, and you can see the difference in how much is actually around the planet. And this stuff is reflecting the sun, and when you reflect the sun, you change things. You cool the Earth, okay, and that's what we're going to get into here. So we have 5,000 satellites, and there's way more than that, okay? But this might be a few years old, and we have all kind of sounding rockets. Now nobody even knows what a sounding rocket is. They use it for a lot of reasons. A sounding rocket will be shot into a storm and expunge a bunch of chemicals to maybe change the storm, shut the storm down, or move it. And they use sounding rockets all the time. And the nuclear power plants, if they're going to be attacked by a lightning storm, they're going to use sounding rockets. If there's a hurricane that's going to hit a power plant, they're going to use sounding rockets. Look this stuff up. It's insane. Now, we got this character who makes a nice car, who also makes spaceships. SpaceX. And this guy's popping holes into our atmosphere. And every time you pop a hole into our atmosphere, you're going to get solar winds. And they're going to come in. And putting holes in our atmosphere is destroying the planet alone. This guy's going to put 30,000 holes into our atmosphere in the next 3 years. Not to mention all the space junk that's going to reflect. All right, let's move on into fires. These are all the fires in 1919. Imagine that. All these fires, and 90% of them were man-made. Agricultural fires, and who knows what other reasons, okay? But they were naturally made. And these are the active fires just in one day. So right now in America, the news is, the camels are going to be, they're going to kill camels in Australia because they're drinking water and they need the water. They're showing you little poor koala bears, drinking water out of cups. And, there's a lot of smoke and mirror here. But the big fires also are in Africa. And those fires are causing a ton of smoke. There's also tons of fires in other parts of the world. So these are all the active fires in one day on the last day of 2019. Now here's Australia, and this worldview map is a good map, okay, to look things up at. And you can zoom in, and you can actually see fires. You can see aerosol injections, all kind of stuff. And you can see how these fires up close are creating clouds. Now look at the cloud here. This is just a couple days ago. It's January 2020. These fires have actually created a cloud that's the size of Australia. And you know what? Australia is about as big as America. Okay? So think how that's like an entire cloud of smoke, size of America in the ocean right now. And a lot of it's going up. Now think of how much sun reflection. This is causing storms and rainstorms, and it's also dispersing into our ozone. And up there, it's going to kind of like create a reflection and dimming of the planet. There's just one here. Okay. Let's move on to volcanoes. Lots of volcanoes. We can't stop volcanoes. Okay. And volcanoes create volcanoes. Depending on the size of the volcano, it could take the ash up 30 miles, 30 miles. And some of these volcanoes, the ash is still up there from 20 years ago. Now, what's up there is sulfur, and sulfur is a great reflecting dimming property. Excuse me. No wonder Bill Gates has tons of patents on it. Bill Gates wants to have balloons put sulfur into the sky and planes. He's probably already doing it because they want to reflect the sun. Their idea is if we reflect the sun before it hits the earth, then the CO2 won't be as effective in melting the North Pole. Basically, that's what they're thinking. But you know what? No. This is what they want you to think. What's really going to happen, and you're going to see in a few minutes, is the oceans are going to cool, and watch what happens when the oceans cool. And of course, look, these are all the volcanoes. There's tons of them. I mean, look at all these volcanoes just around Indonesia. So we always have volcanoes causing problems. I mean, that is a problem by itself, and that's probably what killed the dinosaurs and other civilizations. So, I mean, that is something we cannot even control. And I told you the size of some, like Mount St. Helens, and some are bigger, okay? And, volcanoes do change the weather. We're moving to the ships, all right? Now, do we really need all these ships? These are all the ships that were in the oceans on the first day of January in 2020. One ship exhaust can create enough pollution as almost 3 million cars. Okay, now that number changes because there's different diesel fuels, and there's bunker fuels that they use. And most of these ships, some of these ships I'm going to call bad ships. And there's an example of a bad ship. Okay, this ship is moving cotton, and it's taking it to China. And cotton grown, they pump water out of the aquifer that doesn't come back that quick, right? I mean, sometimes decades. And so they pump, ready for this, 1,200 gallons of water to make enough cotton to make one T-shirt. So they steal the water from America because we're a super high virtual water exporter. We put the cotton on one of these little red ships, and we ship it to China. And some little kid over there sews up a shirt, and he uses maybe a gallon of water to make that shirt. And he puts the shirt back on another ship and ships it back. But what did we just do? We just gave China 1,400 gallons of water, and what do they do? Give us a T-shirt that's probably going to stay in our clothes. All right, that's 2 ships we didn't need. Okay, I'm getting a little excited. Okay, but these are all the ships out there, and look what this ship does. One ship. This is bunker fuel. Now, you can track ships too. There's all types of programs. Go look these things up. Just watch the ship, man. You can watch it wherever. It's got a number. It's got a name. But guess what? If you look hard enough, you're going to find out that there's about 20 to 40 ships that don't. Plus the government ships don't. And these ships tend to go around in circles, and they make smoke. And this smoke goes up in the atmosphere, and it causes high pressure and low pressure zones, which can steer rain. These is what we call ship tracks. If you look at these, you can actually follow these every day. And this is going into the atmosphere. These particles are going into the sky. Okay, and some are getting to the ozone, into the upper atmosphere, where they stay for long periods of time reflecting the sun. Now, before I get to my calculations, I want to let you know about one more thing. People think that all the water in the world, is in our Great Lakes and other lakes and in the ground. It's not. There's a lot of, it's called precipitable, total precipitable water. And you could actually watch this thing. These are little, I call them fingers. And these fingers move around, and they usually stay unless you change them. Okay? You can change them by what? Particles, by pressure, by changing the wind. So this is all the water in the world that comes from the oceans and evaporates, and it's called the river in the sky. And it goes around the equator-ish kind of, fanning out where it's warmer, because that's where things evaporate more. And so this is what fuels the world. And this is what the world wants. This is what secretly 30 companies and countries are taking, using, and modifying. For example, China used this and modified it so it wouldn't rain during Olympics. China now is building these ionic heaters where they're moving some of this water, and they're trying to grow vegetables in the desert. Okay, the they they stole water from the Iranians and droughted them, and then they flooded them. Okay, New Zealand was flooded, it was on fire, and they put the fire out. Okay, so you can use this, and there's literally thousands and thousands of patents. They've been using this river in the sky and modifying it for decades. For decades, this stuff is all you can look up. Climate Viewer, go to Climate Viewer. That's a way, and they have what's called weather modification history. Check it out. Okay, so we're getting close here. So here's your river in the sky, and this is just one day. I just try to see. So we got the sand. There's a lot of sand that was coming off the Sahara Desert, and that's a big deal because that goes across the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, and it causes all kind of problems. And a lot of the sand is in the micron size that causes cancer. Over down, you can see Australia. The fires causing the change in the river. And then there's ships way up on top. There's a little circle there. There's 10 ships in there burning bunker fuel going around in circles. And look what they do. They move that water. And they spin that water around, okay? So they can control this river. This is what the world is after. They're not after oil. They're not after resources. This is what the world is going for. The river in the sky, the total precipitable water. And nobody knows about this. Nobody watches this, and it changes every day. Now, here's what we got. So, if we have so much water in the ocean, which is, we're going to say 10 to the 15th power, all right? And we've got land water too, 10 to 15 power. If you look at these numbers, there's a lot more in the ocean, obviously, right? And we also have some in the atmosphere at all times, which is also 10 to the 15th power. That is the river in the sky, okay? Now we look at what evaporates from the oceans, and it's 10 to the 12th power. And what precipitates, 10 to 12 power. And what evaporates from the land and precipitates is 10 to the 12 power. So if you calculate the total evaporated water, which every day, is you're going to have 423. Okay, just use that number, but it's 10 to the 12th power. Okay, and so some of it precipitates, which is most of it. So every 7 days, this stuff rains, snows, whatever. Okay, and some always stays up top. So what's going to happen to this world when there's a ton of particles floating in the ozone that's not turning to rain, that's caused by all mostly man-made stuff? What's going to happen is the sun's going to reflect. And when the sun starts reflecting, which has been doing, and there's my picture with the sun reflecting, it's going to cool the ocean. And what's going to happen when the ocean cools? You're not going to have evaporation. So the atmospheric river is going to diminish and diminish and diminish. And as it diminishes, the seas are going to rise. Now, sure, we're going to have some ice melting, okay? Of course. But the ice won't melt that much if you've got particles in the sky. So we're looking at two different things. We're looking at assuming the heat comes into the ground, heats it up, and then reflects back up and hits CO2, which they want a carbon tax us for, which is going to melt the snow. No. They are modifying the weather, okay? And if the oceans get cooler, which they are, okay? I mean, we have not had any El Niños, okay? And there's more and more particles in the sky, they're going to rise. And I believe the calculation was if it was completely dimmed, if we had a completely 100% dimming of the planet, there would be 342 feet of ocean rise. Well, that's a lot. That's a ton of water. So maybe that's what happened when Noah was around for a while. You know, it was 40 days. Maybe it was a volcano. And so that's not going to happen. Maybe not today or tomorrow. But what if 2% of it happens or 3%, which is happening? That's 30 feet, 2%. We could easily create this by the particles in the sky. Now, this is diabolical. This, you can look this stuff up. And we're at the end here. And this is not conspiracy. This is real. There's ionic heaters. There's all over the world. They're building one in the Netherlands now that can almost like, I think they could steal so much water, wouldn't even be fun. They could create a drought anywhere they want. Okay, in the Netherlands when they're done with that one, we have one in we have several in the U.S. One is HARP, which is an old one. It's not that powerful. And then there's a bunch of South America, and they're on ships. And there's corporations that have ionic heaters on ships, and they move these things around. They can create micro environments. They also have sounding rockets, and sounding rockets are used to disperse particulate. They can disperse bacteria, probably sulfur, aluminum, okay, whatever they want. And different particles do different things. And they'll put them up and they can reflect the sun. And they're shooting these up daily. We have satellites that shoot microwaves. So let's say a plane disperses aluminum and you got a microwave on a satellite or a ground microwave. You could excite that particulate in the sky, and you could change the wind directions. Okay, they have lasers. They use lasers for weather. Cloud ionizers. They have the farmers are buying their own machines to create storms and rain on their properties all over the world. Cloud seeding, cloud ionizers, ship tracks. We talked about the ships, and I told you about those certain ships that go around in circles. Okay, and now we have airplane fuel. The airplanes also, high atmospheric airplanes, will fly and disperse sulfur dioxide. And that's all the Bill Gates stuff that he wants to put in the sky. And the sulfur dioxide is mimicking volcanoes because the volcanoes would change all the weather in the world. And they're like, well, we could do that. So they're mimicking volcanoes, but what they're really doing is they're reflecting our sun. And that's going to hurt us, our health, number one. It's going to lower the ocean temperatures. It's going to minimize evaporation into the river. It's going to lower the water, precipitable water, and they're going to have a water war. They're already having a water war. These countries are stealing and fighting for that river every single day with their planes and all these methods that I told you. Okay, and now they even have them on ships, and they have them on the ground. Now let's talk about what's also going on that nobody knows about. You can look this up. The Aviation Environmental Design, they have a computer program. And this computer program controls all the plane sorties, the fuel in them, how much fuel to burn, where the fuel to burn, where to dump it, when to dump it, and the coordinates. I mean, this computer, if they have a neighborhood that's kind of pissed off because of the noise, they'll change it. They'll move it. Okay, the air quality. Okay, they can control. This computer can control us. They can actually create a drought within a month in a certain area just by the fuel that they burn and changing the routes of the jets. The pilots have no clue. This is all done by a computer, and it's done by the jet fuel, and there's different types of jet fuel. Everybody wants you to believe there's a bunch of planes up there with a spitting fuel out and causing these chemtrails, and that's what they want you to believe because that's the conspiracy. They want you to make everybody think it's all crazy. It's not. It's huge. It's huge. And guess what? There's a study. You can look up the study. When you put sulfur up to 6,000 parts per million into the air, it also increases mortality. And we're not going to get into eugenics and social engineering, but there may be other things beyond what I'm talking about today that exist. So, if anything, you might want to find out where you live, and there's all types of programs that you can look and see how much carbon monoxide is in the air, how much carbon dioxide is in the air, how much sulfur is in the air, and where you're getting pollution and which way the wind is blowing, and if you're downstream from a place. And you might want to try to figure out what you're breathing, and maybe you wear a mask that day. Hey, thanks for coming on. I'm sorry about my voice. Please rate and subscribe.